Kia ora Anna, and welcome back to our panel talking about pretty dodgy to better-gogy teaching. So today, our topic is racism in education, and very timely, I think, with everything that's been happening in our world. Not a new topic, I should say, but one that's definitely surfaced and been given visibility with recent events. So I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves in alphabetical order.
Okay, I think that's me. Talo for everybody, Malo so far. I'm Aiono Manu Faaea-Semeatu, Senior Pasifika Manager at the Manukau Institute of Technology in Aotearoa. Malo.
Malo.
Kia ora, I'm Bruce George from Literacy Aotearoa. I'm the Curriculum Manager and I'm based in Auckland.
Kia ora, Bruce.
Oh, kia ora, that's me, Jay. Kia ora, I'm Jennifer Leigh. I'm working for Aotearoa as the Sector Services Manager and I'm based in Aotearoa, Christchurch. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Jennifer.
Tēnā tātou, my name is Ataahia Hurihanganui, also known as Ataahia for short. I'm based in the Wairarapa Wellington regions. I am the owner and founding director of Reorua Limited, Te Reo Māori language education and consultancy business, and I am also a board member for ACE Aotearoa. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koe Ataahia. Tēnā anō koutou. Thank you for joining us. So, racism in education, and I'm just going to drop in there a couple of examples. We're not short on examples of racism, but two that came to mind when I was looking at the preparation for today's kōrero is, wearing a hat, a Trump hat to a Black Lives Matters protest. It was one, and being a teacher and doing that, and also looking at our tauira, our students that are in high schools using that platform, putting posters up in a school environment and having them taken down. So I've just grabbed those two examples as front of mind really, but really wanted to open up the kōrero to you guys. Manu, do you want to tell us more about that?
Sure, I'll kick us off. Just thinking about those two examples he outlined with my teacher hat, especially about the MAGA hat. I actually watched the video where he kind of explained himself as to why he took that hat. I think there were parts of his explanation I thought were disingenuous, especially around, he kind of laughed partway through, and I thought to myself, that's why are you laughing for? It's not funny. My initial Pacific Island reaction.
Well, but he's married to a Pacific.
Yeah, I mean, but that doesn't give you license to wear that kind of stuff. And I was also thinking as a teacher, if I put myself in the shoes of a teacher, being a former teacher, high school teacher myself, I was thinking, we're meant to be teaching our kids values about how to embrace and be inclusive of everybody. And I thought to myself, this guy's in a position of power in that sense of hierarchy, and in a Christian school, I think he is in as well. I thought, wow, that's just double whammy there. But I was just really disappointed at his stance. And even when you saw the footage of when he was actually confronted by an African-American woman to have the dialogue and have the discussion, he couldn't do it. So I thought, why would you wear that hat then if you're not prepared? If you're going to wear something, inflammatory in that sense to a protest of that nature, be prepared to have the discussion. Otherwise, don't wear it at all. That's just me for now. I just want to get other people's thoughts on that too.
Just in terms of our education system, it's pretty much been racist from the start.
Settle down.
When I was at school,
start at the panel.
Yeah, and I think a big problem is we're not actually taught our history of this country in our schools. It's only once we get to tertiary we start to learn a bit more in depth about what actually happened to Māori in this country and Indigenous people in this country, and then you actually start to find out that actually everywhere is racist, and that's why for me, having critical literacy as part of anything we do is really important. But otherwise, we start wearing those math hats, because it's trendy, we don't really think about it. But, you know, that person we're talking about, it's that unconscious bias, but, you know, they can use it as an excuse, but when it's unconscious, that means it's entrenched. And I think, you know, that's a major part is, you know, we compare ourselves to other countries where you see more violence and things like that. And we see our part, and there's not so much violence and it's not so graphic and all that. So we kind of think, oh no, we're okay. But once again, that's just another type of racism, and you can't compare it, you know, especially when you're an Indigenous person or minority groups. So that's my little head start, and I'll pass it on.
That's a head start. Oh, Bruce is warming up. Good on that. Hiya.
Okay, yeah, no, just tautu ko ngā kōrero, eh? I'm very much in the same boat as Manu in terms of understanding our teaching staff, our teachers as leaders, as the rangatira of the learners and the participants in their space of education, and therefore they're role models. So for me, what you do as a teacher when you're in the space of education, whether you're in the class or outside of the class and you're with learners who are seeing you as a role model, everything you do has to be purposeful. And so if you are putting a hat on like that, it's a conscious decision that you're making. And therefore, what kind of messaging are you portraying? Are you presenting? Are you possibly representing? And like Manu said, I was not just disappointed in the action, but in the act itself when he was confronted and how he had no words, you know, he had nothing to say. And that just shows not just the ignorance, but the cheek, you know, and that's what hurts. That's the part that hurts. And very similarly in your other example, Anna, when you're talking about when, again, teaching staff in those positions of actually, we could use this to our advantage, we can open up wānanga, when they go and purposely take down posters which are supporting a movement in support of discrimination. Again, what is that saying? What are we telling our students? What are we telling our learners? And instead of using that experience to maybe enhance the voice, invite them in and ask them, you know, what is this about? How are you feeling at the moment? Why are you feeling so, you know, so emotional about something that you have to go and put posters up? They purposely took them down and silenced that voice. And I found that really hurtful, actually. As a Maori woman myself, having had, like Bruce said, many experiences myself, and also having heard of years, decades of racism in our education system. It's 2020. Come on, you know, we've got to move on. We've got to grow up. We've got to do better. Cool. That's me for now, just warming up.
Just warming up. Oh my God. Over to Jennifer.
Oh, well, yes, to follow on, I mean, I totally support the conversations we've been having so far, and agree with what you were saying, Bruce, around the critical literacy. And that's one of the things that I've always valued about any involvement with adult community education, is their support always of the educator to use those teachable moments, like you were talking about, Aiono and Ataahia, about trying to grab the situation and think, well, you know, what can we learn from this? And that, I think, is what's so sad about the stories, that we don't actually hear what happened since. And I know that one of those incidents happened in a girls' school here in Christchurch, and I do know that actually there was a bit of work that happened with that community afterwards. But of course, that's what we don't hear. But that's the special part, I think, about that critical literacy, of unpacking, deconstructing what's happening, and enabling people. I've loved how you said that, Ataahia, about enhance the voice, you know, like enable them to kind of really understand and to have a safe space to share what was going on for people when those posters were ripped down, when people were, you know, publicly displaying their support for a type of person or a type of, you know, obviously Trump. But I think that's the special part, is having the ability of an educator to then involve the learner to learn more, and with that hopefully they can learn more to share with their own whānau in the future, because I think that's what a lot of the whole response is. And again, I've heard that some of the responses that why people took down the posters is they didn't agree but didn't understand the political message that, or the political situation that sits behind a poster that some people thought was actually confronting. So it's you know, it seems like a whole lot of steps in there that, as you know, you've all said, it's sad that we have this situation still in Aotearoa that we have to work through, you know, and work with various people in our society to help enable them to have their voice heard and enable them to share and learn from each other going forward.
Great, thank you. Nice to hear all of your perspectives on those examples, and also starting to move our conversation into responsive pedagogy, you know, the teaching practice, and how not just those examples, but I'm sure you have many examples of your own around racism, and whether you were a learner or the teacher, tutor, kaiako, and how do we look for that teachable moment? And I'm trying to pick up on things that you have said in relation to how you view it as educators, but also the advice around how do we facilitate these conversations of racism, very real in adult community education sector. So, you know, we've heard from migrant learners who talk about, well, why do you come to ACE? Because they say it's a place where they can go to learn how to deal with racism. And then you have Maori, you have Pacific experiences that are, what I hear today are things that, you know, because some of us have been around long enough, they're the same experiences that we're hearing, that our younger generations are hearing today. So I thought with the discussion that we're having now, whether you wanted to, I don't know, do you want to share some of those experiences, personal experiences of racism, whether you were the learner or the educator?
Yeah, thanks, Analiese. I'll kick this one off. In terms of experiences, it's, for me, there's no real distinction between experiencing racism as a learner or a teacher or a leader in that sense. You know, racism is racism, because I've always been on the receiving end of it. So it doesn't matter what capacity I'm holding in that space. It is sad to know that nothing's really changed in the system. Education was set up and designed as an institution to advance, you know, those that already got a head start, you know, and for those of us who experience the racism, you know, we have to learn the codes of power in order to excel and be successful, so that we can open the doors for our communities to come through. And I think that's why, you know, in the line of work that I do, it's very Trojan horse. You know, I have to learn all the different codes and different ways of being, so that if there are, you know, Pacific or Māori people missing at a table, I need to voice those things. Particular instances for me that are quite memorable have always been when there have been no Indigenous people, no Māori at a table, and I will raise Māori interests, and I get the look like, well, what are you talking about, that you're not Māori? And then I say, well, I'm born in Aotearoa, so, you know, not only have I studied the stuff at school, but I have lots of Māori friends, you know, tino, you know, that people that I love and care about in their communities. And I've learned so much about Māori history through my friends and colleagues. And in order for me to honour Te Tiriti, it's been through those connections and speaking not on their behalf, but to kind of link with people in a palatable way, you know, and that it does suck that I have to do that in a palatable way, but in the absence of any kind of way, you know, I see myself as a bridge and a weaver. And if I can kind of, you know, I love having little sayings and little, you know, phrases about things. And, you know, Ataahia, you talked before about rangatira, and I immediately thought about, you know, a way in which we can work together with our rangatahi, you know, is that, you know, rangatira and rangatahi need to continually rāranga together, you know, weaving these things, weaving our understandings so that we can have, you know, some really great outcomes. I think in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we're really scared to have these discussions. You know, when Jennifer talks before about things being quite confrontational, and that's because people want to fast forward to an outcome, but you can't have the outcome without the difficult conversation. And the reason why these conversations are difficult is because we've never actually addressed them before. They've always been swept under the carpet. People feel like they're being attacked. But no, it's about really listening to each other, critically listening, looking at yourself in the mirror and seeing, what have my actions contributed to that racism, you know? And so I know we're talking here about, you know, Pākehā, Maori and Pacific, and I really try and make a conscious effort, and it's really hard, to be circumspect in that sense, so that I'm not just representing, you know, possibly Samoan interests, but Pan-Pacific values and views. And, you know, I make a point to learn about all Indigenous cultures, so that if those voices are missing from any table, that I can help to bring that forward. So it's really hard to be an ambassador of all people of colour, but someone has to do it. And sadly, in the spaces that I am in, there's not many of us. And so these types of talanoa and kōrero are really important, because I get to connect with people who are, you know, on a similar waka. So yeah, I'm just really grateful for these experiences.
No, whakatei. Anyone else?
I love the raranga analogy just there. I'm a really big believer in reclaiming and reinstating, I suppose, the real definitions, the true definitions of Māori words that we use every day. And rangatira is actually one of them, the weaving of people together. Very different concept in leadership to possibly a power construct in another worldview. But yeah, I just thought that was a good segue into some of my background. I call myself a privileged Māori, if you like, for lack of a better description. I grew up in a time where I had the option and the choice to go to kura Māori, kura kaupapa Māori and kohanga reo. After my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents and my ancestors had been fighting for years, you know, since the 1863 Native Schools Act and the suppression of te reo Māori in schools, the suppression of being Māori in our education system was made law, was made, you know, legal and normalised in our society. And since then, our whānau have gone through a lot of different battles and challenges to get to the late 80s, early 90s of my childhood, where again I had that availability to me. So I was very lucky, and I was raised in te reo Māori at home and in school. So it meant that I was in a space where everyone around me looked like me, spoke like me, and had long, beautiful, historic names like mine. And so I really didn't face the racism in education that I often heard about as a child until my teens, and that's when I made the decision, for other reasons and other interests, to go to a mainstream high school in Wellington. Now, this high school is quite well known for being very accepting of diversity, but I do remember a time when I had to be mindful of who I was and be careful about how much of me I could share. And at the time, I didn't realize, you know, what that meant. But as an adult reflecting, I think I've realized now, in hindsight, that I was becoming what I had to be to fit in to the system. And that's one of my most profound memories of the racist system that it is. The fact that I had to almost strip away parts of me, and an example of that was my name. And that was quite profound for me. It was one of my first days of high school, and I couldn't be Te Ataahia all of a sudden. I had to create a nickname for myself, and I remained that nickname all the way through high school. And when I bump into old friends and old peers of mine, old teachers of mine, some of which I'm very close to this day, they only know me as T, you know. So those are some of the experiences I faced. And now that I'm a teacher, I'm very much like Manu. I try to be an ambassador and an advocate for, you know, are we actually engaging correctly with the minorities, with those who are being discriminated against, with those who are suffering the most in a system that wasn't made for them, and in a system that was actually created to suppress their identity and their culture? Are we actually doing that, not just purposefully, but are we actively, proactively seeking better ways to do things? So yeah, that was what I was thinking about as Manu was talking about the raranga thing, because I really love the concept of raranga in Te Ao Māori, the idea of weaving. And if I take it back to what Jennifer was saying, you know, sometimes that's all it needs. You know, that's all that needs to be, a bit of a conversation. And when we're having conversation, we're having wānanga, that's what's happening. People are being weaved together with their differences and their uniqueness. And when we're weaved, we're one, we're united. So it's not complicated. I think we just need to get through the hard stuff, and very soon, very quickly, we'll reap the benefits and the rewards. And my biggest frustration is, again, knowing that I sit in the privilege of all the fight and battle of those who have gone before me. And so I roll my eyes when people make really hurtful mistakes, like wearing a MAGA hat to a Black Lives Matter, you know, event. I really do. I roll my eyes, and I do have to remind myself, they are becoming the minority. People like that who think that that's okay are actually becoming what we like to phrase as the dinosaurs of today. So onward and upward, I say.
Tēnā koe.
And following on from that kōrero, thanks Tahia about names. Manu, I'm going to apologise. I didn't use your correct name earlier. And I think, you know, that just shows my fragility as a white person, that, and an educator, that I hadn't correctly, you know, used your name. And I think that's one of the areas that so many people in education who have positions of power do and still do. And Tahia, yours kōrero about your own background, I think really brings alive how sad that is to hear that happens and has happened in so many people's lives. So I wanted to add that in there and just make that apology, because it is bad that I've done that in this public forum. So sorry.
Kia ora, Jennifer. I mean, my name, Analiese Roberston, you know, people get confused anyway because they're looking for someone white. And then however many ways you can say my name. But I think, you know, in reality, as educators, this whole cultural training, cultural competency, cultural sensitivities is often pitched around the basic elements. I say basic because to me it is basic, about pronouncing somebody's name correctly. Is that enough? Is it enough to say talofa when a Samoan walks in the room as an educator? You know, or are we making assumptions about what people prefer? And I'm really trying to get to the better-gogy side of the conversation too. But thank you for raising that, Jennifer. Because I think, you know, surface, we're so used to, oh, there's a cultural training workshop, ED for educators. And then we'll spend an hour on A, E, I, O, U. You know, that's great, but is that enough? And that's things that we were doing 20 years ago. What are we doing now? How are we moving that conversation around professional development or teaching practice in general, and looking at what can we do as educators to harness the teachable moments, to have these courageous conversations? What's its place in our learning environments? Bruce, I know you're waiting patiently to chime in on this, kōrero.
Yeah, I think like everyone else, we've had those experiences through education. Mine, because I was born in the 60s, when I went to high school in the 70s, all my older brothers were categorised as Māori students, and they became top Māori students in their high school years. And so when I came along...
Where was that, Bruce? Where did you go to school?
Rotorua Boys High.
Yeah. So you were colonised by Māori over there?
Well, we used to call the place Colditz for some reason. It had a bit of a tradition.
Just for our viewers, Bruce is Cook Island Māori.
But when I was younger, I used to be Hawaiian because I didn't know what a Cook Islander was. And I saw a movie called Blue Hawaii with Elvis Presley.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, that's me. So for a good month, when I was at intermediate, I was Hawaiian.
That explains a lot.
Yeah. And then I go to high school and they tell me, no, you're Māori. And I go, actually, I'm a Cook Islander. And my form teacher said, you have more privileges as a Māori. And I go, actually, I wish I was a Māori, but I'm a Cook Islander. And so I had a rough time after that association. But going on, it's not just racism, you know, between a white teacher and another person. We have it within our own cultures. I have a beautiful daughter who's Jamaican, so she's quite dark. And she went through kohanga reo and all the things like that. And she was picked on because she was black, you know, by our own people and this kind of thing. It's so easy to get swept up into that, you know, them and us and all that sort of stuff, and they look different. So the thing is, in terms of those assumptions now, is like, my niece is quite fair and she looks Pākehā, you know, but she's got a Cook Island mum and things like that. So we have to, as educators, we have to be more inclusive, get to know our learners, find out more about them, share your own stories, and then, you know, you're starting to build a more positive environment. But yeah, it's been inclusive culturally, and it's so easy, you know, to jump into some racist rant, you know, oh, those Asians, those Indians, they do this, they do that, you know, yet I'm an immigrant like them, and my, you know, so it sort of jumps around, and that's why I think, you know, as an educator, trying to be inclusive, getting everyone to share a bit of themselves, and even though we mightn't agree with certain things, at least we start to share those ideas and get to know why people act that way, and maybe they will change when you start sharing your own stories. So yeah, I just think, you know, come back to our pedagogy and andragogy is try to be inclusive. And as an educator, it's easy to be, oh no, I'll just stick to my line of thought and you guys better listen to me because I'm the actual teacher and I'm going to mark your things. But that's an easy way to educate. The hard way is to be inclusive and to have that dialogue and, you know, be open, and that's, you know, that's that critical literacy. But sometimes, you know, if you're critiqued and you're criticised, you feel offended, and so, you know, I think, you know, need to always reflect on those and move on in a better way. That's for me.
Could I just share my screen now? Thanks, Bruce. I thought this is a perfect moment before it doesn't make any sense and is irrelevant. I just wanted to share an example of what a friend and an ex-colleague of mine did in one of her first days as a high school teacher in Wellington. So she became a Te Reo Māori teacher very, very young, and was quite, you know, gunning to kind of get involved, but she realized very quickly that the only way to connect with teenagers was to know them on a personal level. And one of the first activities she did was this whiteboard activity, and I asked her years ago if I can use it in some of my workshops, and she gave me the permission to. She's very happy to share it. So too were her students, but this is it here. Let me just share it for everyone to see. And it goes back to what you're saying, Bruce, because while we can say let's be inclusive, what does that actually look like? You know, what are the things we need to do to make sure that happens? And for me, this is how simple it is. Hopefully you can see it. She wrote, what is something you wish your teachers knew about you? And she did this because she was a new teacher going into the year. So the students had already developed relationships, had already developed routine in this high school. She was a brand new teacher, and you can imagine all year groups came and learnt Te Reo Māori from her, so years 9 to years 13. And while she was waiting for something quite, you know, deep or profound or whatever, they were really simple things. How to say my name right. I really loved this one. Just because I'm partially Indian doesn't mean I'm a genius. So what she found very quickly is actually a lot of them were around the way they were being treated by others, but in particular by teachers. And that's what she wanted to know from them. And this was her way of engaging. It gave them a voice. It gave them the control. They were leading this kaupapa. They became the rangatira in the space. And that's what weaving's all about. It's a you know, it's a reciprocity, right? It's back and forth. No one's more or less than the other. It's a coexistence, and the power is shared in this beautiful idea of balance. So I just wanted to share that as maybe an example of what we can do to be inclusive. You know, who are you all? Who are you as individuals? What do I need to know? And what do I need to be mindful of as a teacher to better engage with you as we see the year through? And as you can see, it's got nothing to do with teaching Te Reo Māori, but she did this, and apparently giving them that power allowed them to feel comfortable and confident as themselves walking into her space, their shared space, I should say. And she had a lot of success, not only in the content she was delivering, but in the relationships she built with these students. So yeah, I just thought that was quite a lovely thing to show, and I've held on to it like a taonga going through my professional years as a teacher myself.
Yeah, I love that, Ataahia. It's really a great way, isn't it, for teachers to find out about people. And to me, when you were talking about the concept of rangatira or being a rangatira, it also kind of spoke to me about that whole concept of ako, about sometimes teacher, sometimes learner too, around that shared power that I really find difficult myself as a learner and as an educator in any environment. And I think that's, I really love that, how people have said those things that can be assumptions. Just because I'm Maori doesn't mean I know everything. So all of those assumptions, you know, are really evident often in the learning situation. And for me, some of you may know that I worked in prisons for a long time, and I constantly came up against that power dynamic. Of course, there is a natural power dynamic anyway within a corrections environment, because that people don't go there voluntarily. But I mean, equally, there were the power dynamics of who was entitled to certain roles within the institution, who was entitled to work on, you know, education parole, work parole, and who was entitled to you know, use or have benefit from education. So I really remember some battles, because sadly so many of the population in our prisons are Maori, that there's some issues around people feeling that some learners, they weren't worthy of continuing in education and studies. And some of that, I think, although it was around the fact that they were seen as prisoners, had a lot to do with race as well, and the power that people could exert over what they thought they were eligible to learn and eligible to do in life, what careers they could move on to or not move on to, or what was the point they were only going back to the gang. You know, all of those serious assumptions about why would women want to learn further, why would they be able to study through university, why would they want to learn te reo, why would they want to learn computer skills. And yeah, it was a tough time trying to explain to the powers that be, and sadly often they were people like myself who were white, but a lot of people just didn't understand that that could be possible, that women and Maori women, Maori men as well, Pasifika men, Pasifika women would want other options in life rather than the options of, you know, just returning to being at home or crime.
Thanks, Jennifer. Aiono, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's been really great to listen to everyone and their viewpoints. It really made me think a lot about, you know, in the classroom space, you know, cultural safety, especially when I'm thinking with Pacific learners, there's this kind of level of apprehension around, will I be accepted in this space, especially if they've had negative schooling experiences in the past. Part of my line of work is working with, corporates or other people who do community education work in the sector, and it's really helping to increase their level of cultural intelligence around working with Pacific peoples. And I found that, we've talked before about difficult conversations, but I try to forearm them to be able to have courageous conversations, and that it does involve a little bit of what Bruce was saying before with the sharing of yourself. So when we're doing those types of sessions with people, I have to role model that and kind of share my experiences to then entice them to share about their own experiences in a safe forum, in a safe space, so that I can kind of role model how we can weave together. So we role model the raranga so that they can go out into their communities and try that for themselves. We make some follow-up and keep in touch. I just think that there's definitely more integration that needs to happen, amongst those of us that are doing this kind of work, because too often it can happen in silos. Part of some of the initiatives that we're working on is, especially a lot of COVID-19, there's a lot of jobs out there in the sector that industries are looking for Maori and Pacific workers. There's investment from government in terms of, Maori and Pacific health force workers that are required. So there's, booming industry with health, project management, and some of I'm just thinking about meetings I've had in the last couple of months with lots of different industries, and the question is, how can we engage with our communities to bring them on board, because that's what they're crying out for. So when we're looking at our approach to community education and just getting the message out to our peoples that you guys are needed, you are sorely in demand, but the problem is the sector doesn't know how to respond to you and doesn't know how to bring you in, so it's continuing to have these conversations, but in spaces where we can leverage and influence those that are the key decision makers to kind of ease the pipeline a bit and, oil the gauges that need to be moved to make this happen faster. Yeah.
So Aiono, at the moment, there's consultation happening on the Pasifika strategy through NZQA. Do you have any comment on that? Just in terms of, we're talking about racism in education, and we know at a high level there are strategies, tertiary, schools, and NZQA's just put their document out for consultation. So can you give some comment just on your perspective of strategy level, what it looks like and how that's implemented, how useful it is in the conversation around racism in education?
I think, first of all, the past NZQA strategies, especially the Pasifika one, has never really been implemented well across different sectors. I think it needs to be publicised a lot more, promoted more. There's a lot of issues around just looking at NZQA as a compliance organisation rather than, if these guys are coming out with the qualifications, how can we have some meaningful discussions around relating that really well to industry? Because of COVID-19, there's a lot more difficulties around how we can, develop short courses, and, the paperwork, the red tape is holding people back from, really getting out there to make money for their families. And that's what we're passionate and interested about, is how can you create a strategy that, is not only has got the arms and legs and the longevity, for the time span that it's framed for, but I'm actually critically interested in transitions between the different sectors, between the different levels, so that what you produce and it comes out the other end, how is that going to add value? If you're looking at a potama kind of concept, from level on level on level, we're trying to increase the capacities and capabilities of Maori and Pacific peoples to make sure that they are at their premium, because we need to be at our optimum levels of performance for our communities and for the future of Aotearoa. We're making more babies. So that's the impetus there, right? People always ask, why is the focus on Maori and Pacific? I mean, we're making more children. So we need to invest in our peoples because we're producing more babies that need to be productive members of society. And there's a lot more, there's a concept I've come up with just around domestic diversity, right? So there's no longer just Māori or Samoa or Cook Island. There's a lot of, we love who we love. We make babies with people that we think are attractive, that are not ethnic specific, not people that look like us, So there's these types of realities that need to be factored into these strategic plans, so that people know the purpose of a strategic plan is to be directly connected to an implementation plan. Words are only good on paper if you can actually make them come to life. So we need to make sure that these become a reality.
I'd just like to follow on from Aiono and Jennifer. You both mentioned about that silence, and that's a part of our whole system of oppression, assimilation. It's all racism, and so the culture of silence, especially from Indigenous and minority groups, actually are internalized by us, because for a lot of us, we think that, I'm Polynesian, my dad is working class, I'm going to be a labourer, and we accept that, and we take it silently, So when we talk about strategies and things like that, and for Maori and Pacific, they got to realise that they have to break that code of silence, so they can actually start listening to those voices, rather than, as a good PI would go, do you understand? We go, and then we go around, what the hell did they say? And we do it with a nice big smile. And so from the other point of view, they see us smiling and go, oh, cool, they've got nothing to add, so we must be on the right track. But it's not. It's a lot of those cultural dynamics that we have, we respect our elders, we let everyone else go first, and all those sort of things. But they don't realise, that when they do certain things, they are marginalising us, and they're not letting us have our voice and things like that. So it was just in terms of those, when you mentioned that silence, and I was thinking, yeah, it's just, that's a part of, oppression by my dominant groups, and how we take on those dominant values and become more individualized, look after yourself. Money, wealth, and status is important. Family, they can do their own, they can go on their own waka, and when we are confronted with that, we kind of go, actually, no, that's not cool. And I've always felt, I've always did as biculturally and by default, not by choice, but because at home, we're Rarotongan and Achuan. At school, we have to work like Pākehās, and that's the internalizing that you need to start thinking about. And even like today, me saying I'm Achuan and Rarotonga, because the fact that we're named the Cook Islands is quite disturbing when you know about the history of Captain Cook. So, all those sort of things. So I will go back into my culture of silence now.
Aye, that's good. I mean, it's a reality, colonization. I'm Cook Island as well, like Bruce is in conversation we're having. Our identity, the huge impacts on colonization that we're dealing with today for ourselves personally, but also for the many generations. What did you call them, Aiono? Our diversity, you use a term.
Oh, domestic diversity.
Domestic diversity, yes, that's right. Jennifer, you're a minority here. This is really unusual. Wasn't organised that way, obviously, but do you want to share some thoughts on the conversation at the moment?
Oh, thank you. I think those points that Aiono raised and Bruce around cultural safety and silence are very important to me as an educator, to ensure that all voices are heard. I think you mentioned, Ataahia, you're really conscious, at meetings and round tables, whose voice is not there. And it is something that I do hold on to and find hard. It's uncomfortable to raise that at times, but it does never cease to amaze me how people don't even think. They don't think whose voice is not here, who isn't here at that table. They just carry on, and this is how we'll be, and this is what we'll decide, and this is what will action, and this is what will follow. So
it's worse, Jennifer, when they talk about you in front of you, without you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I'll go into my silence now.
Oh, but no, I think as an educator, though, they're the things that I really work hard at. And, you know, I am learning all the time. I mean, my young daughter, she's 23, she teaches me a lot that I feel I still need to learn about. She's always reminding me and saying, that was a bit racist, or that was a bit judgmental, you know, and it's like she points that out to me about things that I do unconsciously, or I'm not aware of that I'm doing. Yeah, it is unconscious, but there's a whole lot of debate, isn't it, about whether it is unconscious or whether it's learned behaviour, or whether I'm actually denying that I am and can be racist. So it is a journey, and I just feel that I'm not perfect at it and can be called out on, and have done things I'm ashamed of too in the past. It's not, though, I'm not kind of, you know, here as a session of everything that I've done wrong in my life. But I guess the key message there is I keep on learning as an educator about how to be different, how to be better, how to be inclusive, how to enable voices to be heard, how to help and empower people to feel equal in a learning environment. And one, I've got a slide too that I will want to share now, because I think for me it sums up what's important around working as an educator. And here it is here. And so we've covered that off already. We've been talking about that, but I listened in to this webinar talking about racism through adult education from IONTIS, the National Learning Organisation that's equivalent to ACE in Ireland. And I really liked these 5 ideas here that reminded me about things that I, as an adult educator, try to do within my practice, within sessions, is to find those moments to think critically, to try and question all of those inequalities that come into the learning environment. Yeah, so it's not new information, but I just really like that actually this is what, as educators, I think is key to keep working on, to try hard in that sense of, you know, that right we think about with the teaching standards, connecting manaakitanga, whanaungatanga, is understanding our learners, what is it they bring. I love those stories about, like you talked about earlier, Ataahia, sharing their background. But then again, you know, I've gone back, like I talked last time, about reflecting again afterwards, you know, whose voice didn't I encourage today? Whose voice didn't I hear? Who didn't share today? Who wasn't present? Who didn't participate? And then act. You know, the easiest and yet the hardest thing to do is actually to think, okay, next time, this is what I will do. This is how I'll work. This is what I'll change. This is what I'll, you know, upskill in. I'll act on those ideas. So thank you for being patient with my slide sharing there. I'll stop sharing now.
No, thank you. Can we make that available to people if they would like? Thank you, Jennifer.
Well,
Taahia.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was beautiful to listen to. I think what Jennifer has demonstrated a couple of times now in the panel is how we can be vulnerable, how we can own mistakes that we make and mistakes that we've made. And I think that's part of the importance of moving on, that we all have that to share with each other, that it's gonna be hard for all of us. And it goes back to Bruce's kōrero at Rotorua Boys. We have a connection to Rotorua Boys too, Bruce. My whānau's Te Arawa, so we're from Rotorua, and my brother was actually head boy there during our high school years, so very closely connected to the school. But I remember it was probably not as much in his time, but maybe in Dad's time, he talks about when he was at an all-boys school, that was actually in Wellington, Rongotai Boys College, and for a very long time during his junior years, the Māoris thought the Samoans were the enemy, and the Samoans thought the Māoris were the enemy. They were fighting all the time, you know. So as an adult, again, he had to reflect and learn wow, we're actually the same people. We came from the same place. What have we been doing? And so there's a lot of value in learning, and that idea of lifelong learning, and that we even as Māori, as Indigenous peoples going through these struggles every day within the systems, we actually need to do a bit of decolonizing ourselves. You know, what actually is my identity? Who am I? Where am I from? And I think we start from a position of power or empowerment when we know more about who we are. And where we came from, and if we can do that, we're showing our vulnerability too, and that's always powerful to me when someone can say, sorry, can you please repeat your name? I really want to get it right. And even if they keep getting it wrong, showing me the effort and the engagement, and actually I'm really trying, I just can't do it, that means the world to me. And it's those little things that I think in the education system we can do as practitioners, as educators, but even as learners, you know, as showing vulnerability, being prepared to learn, and understanding that the journey is going to be a long one, but that we're trying to do it for a good cause. You know, we're not trying to do it to leave anyone else behind. And I often hear the lovely catchphrase around at the moment, I think it actually was born out of the Christchurch attacks, and it was, if we get it right for Māori, we'll get it right for everyone, because there are a lot of ideas around, you know, let's just try something new, but actually we haven't tried things that aren't new. You know what I mean? We've only ever tried what was given to us, what was done to us. We haven't actually reclaimed enough of maybe our Māori way of thinking and doing to say we've done it, we've tried it, it's not working yet. So it's actually not as hard as we think it is. It's all there, you know, and we all know it. We just need to reclaim it, we need to build on it, we need to develop it, and we need to have faith that there are enough of us who care about it to do it well. So yeah, really love that, Jennifer, hearing your own vulnerability, and you know, laughing at myself, because we too have had our own moments of, wow, you know, when Dad recognised, far out, I was being a racist to my own people. You know, that was a big moment for him in life, and for me it was very similar. It was growing up in small town Masterton. There were predominantly Maori or Pākehā families here, and probably about 2 Asian families. And they were strange, you know, we knew nothing about them. They were the weird ones. And realizing, you know, we've all arrived from somewhere. We've all got something to bring. So it goes back again to your kōrero, Bruce, about inclusivity as well. Yeah, those are my final thoughts. And I just around, I think, again, pedagogy, particularly in the education system, vulnerability, going forward, and knowing that it's going to be a long road, and that's okay, and always being willing to learn. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Ataahia. Bruce, top tip, how not to be racist in education. What's your top tip?
Be brown.
Yeah, what's your other one?
I love what Tahia was saying in terms of lifetime learning, and that's what I'm into, lifetime learning. And like Jennifer, my youngest daughter, she's my biggest teacher, and she's quite abusive to me.
Hey, this is my panel here, thank you.
Sorry. So I think, you know, learning things as we go on, and having all these discussions, and also being honest to yourself. So when we talk about being inclusive, I look at my own blood, and I'm Aotearoa, Rarotongan, Marquesian, Scottish, French, and German. You know, if those are all the bloods that make me, and am I just Rarotongan and Aotearoan? I have Māori kids, and you know, to me, there's so much to be gained in all those cultures, and it's not just like separating, because we can't separate our blood. And I'm all of those. So I think, you know, lifetime learning, that's what we got to do.
Oh, me taki, Bruce. Aiono.
Yeah, it's just really great to hear everyone's feedback. I've got a couple of top tips here, just from synthesizing from everyone's talk. Create palais. Palais are pa'alangi allies in your place. So
Great.
some palais, because your palais will be your friends, right? So get some white friends, people, and work with them, have those courageous conversations and bring them on board and have all of that reciprocity going forward. And another thing was around, Ataahia talking about, we need to decolonize, so I think it's important that we decolonize, not recolonize, that we have this danger among Pacific peoples as we start recolonizing each other, which is really silly. And I speak about that in response to language fluency. Tahia and Brisa both shared about your parents and their journeys and their kind of light bulb eureka moments with racism. And I think for my parents, I laugh when I think about, growing up as a kid in Grey Lynn and in West Auckland, they were very anti-Māori. And when I got to school, I had lots of Māori friends and they were like, what are you friends with them for? And it was like, Mum, Dad, I go to school with them, so I have to learn to get along, and we're learning all these Māori songs, all these Māori waita, and then, transition into adulthood, work in organisations with, very few Pacific, so they'd lump us together with our Māori whānau, and what ends up happening? Aiono, can you play the rakuraku? I'm like, I don't know all your waita, I'm Samoan, but, because I'm a music person, I have to play it all. So I think I blended in a bit too well there. But area around, really being inclusive and being supportive. And I think I've managed to decolonize my Māori colleagues' perceptions of me in that sense, because there was kind of this suspicion around, why are you trying to be Māori for? You're not even Māori. You didn't even whakapapa to Māori. I went, yeah, I know, but I was born in your country, okay? So I'm just trying to live out and honor your treaty that you signed with people that stole your land, okay? That's all I'm trying to do here. Just trying to make reparation in my own Pacific way. So it's just really funny having these types of conversations with people and getting them to understand that, we're all in the same boat here. I just want to be able to row our waka with the skill set that I've got to help further and advance the cause for us to, just to all get along and be nice to each other and be kind. Yeah.
No.
Create some palais.
Jennifer.
Oh, I love
You're the
that.
minority. You're our only pally.
Oh,
Panel.
that's a fabulous word.
Would you like to end our panel with some wisdom?
Oh,
Pally wisdom.
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, I'll just keep it very short. I did, in some prep for the session, was just doing some reading, and one of the things that I read was from Brené Brown around opting out of a conversation because it makes you uncomfortable is the definition of privilege. And she talks about that leaning into the discomfort, and it is a discomfort. I know for myself and for many people, who have that privilege of being white. And so I think it's around, just leaning into that discomfort I liked. And just listen to our learners, listen to what they have to say, what they have to share.
Kia ora, Jennifer. Nice way to end our panel kōrero talanoa about racism in education. So to our viewers out there, thank you for joining us, and have those courageous conversations. Talk about it and let's contribute to the body of knowledge around our practice as educators and how we respond to racism in education wherever we are. So on that note, our panel is out. Thank you.
Ka kite.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
So for